right, let's get into the Formwork Audit export, which can automatically generate your spreadsheets for your technical documentation. And I'm sure you're just excited as I am to create some spreadsheets and automatically generate them for regulatory purposes. So I'll not keep you waiting and we'll actually dive right into it and see how this works. Great. So this is Formwork in case you didn't know it. It has like these sections, but I really will only focus on the tech doc section, which has the actual audit export we're talking about today. That being said, the tech talk section is a Formwork Pro feature, so you actually have to pay money for that, whereas other features in Formwork are free. But this is paid, so sad dog face here. But not everything's free, I suppose. All right. So how does this differ from manually creating your documentation? Let's just maybe like give you some context here. If you would like want to like document your software requirements in a kind of like normal manual way, like most companies do it, you would actually do this in some sort of spreadsheet or some sort of ticketing system. So here I just opened our template, our software requirements list template, and going down to the table, which is the actual content of the template, this would probably be in a spreadsheet. So you would, if you would be like old school, you would like take this table and copy paste it to like Google Sheets or so and fill it out there and then like hand that into your auditors. So for a software requirement, and again, these software requirements, they kind of like describe the features your software has more or less. You would kind of like see here, okay, like each software requirement describes something. For example, like on first launch, show the app introduction or so, and then you would kind of like say, okay, um, is it like a risk control measure? Yes or no? And does it have like related risk IDs? And if so, you would enter the risk IDs. So this generally works, but it has like, and it actually has like a lot of benefits. Like everyone can like edit a spreadsheet and it's pretty simple, but it falls short in certain other respects. For example, and especially with these relations where you kind of say like, well, one software requirement can have like multiple risks, but each of these risks can actually also relate to multiple software requirements, right? So like this requirement could be related to risk one, but it could also have more than risk one. It could have risk two and three. And actually risk one could also be like, it could also be relevant for software requirement one or three or so. So you would end up with this jumbled mess because you have no way of like checking that these references are correct, right? Like what happens if you rename risk 3 to risk 4? Like now you have to go through your software requirements table and it becomes this extreme mess, especially when you want to do traceability matrices, which is essentially like a table mapping which software requirement in this case maps to which risk ID. And then you always have like an X. And of course you would have to do those manually. So that would like suck a lot. So let me just show you how this works in Formwork and how the automatic export works, because I kind of think this context is kind of necessary right now. All right, so in Formwork, your software requirements are simply, so they're not spreadsheets, you enter them in this form. So we have this test project, which we call the Apple Watch. That being said, we are not the manufacturer of the Apple Watch. So if I would want to create a new software requirement for the Apple Watch here, I click on new, and then you already see, okay, this is like structured data. So it's all like pre-filled with like the relevant things. For example, like you have the 6304 categories here, and you can kind of say, okay, I want to create a functional requirement or so. And then you can see already some examples here, like it assigns an ID, analyze a heartbeat for COVID signs, blah, 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 whatever. And now the important thing is here, I can already like create these relations. So I can already say, by which software test is this covered, and then it like pre-fills this with the software test you actually have in your Formwork project. Same goes for failure modes and stakeholder requirements. So the cool thing here really is, okay, it really guides you through creating complete documentation, and you're not like filling out spreadsheets and being all lost in the sense of, well, you're not sure if your documentation is actually complete. Now, if we kind of like look at some of these requirements, you can kind of see, okay, they're displayed here, and then you can actually see, well, which stakeholder requirements, for example, do they relate to, and by which software test are these tested. Okay, so far so good. So this is kind of like entering data in a structured way versus entering data in spreadsheets in a like chaotic way. Now you might ask yourself, well, how does this like differ from like Jira and other tools which are not as like crappy as Jira, like GitHub, GitLab, or even Notion or so, or Asana? Well, it doesn't differ very much, except that these fields are of course pre-configured for you. So you don't have to do any configuration here. It already gives you the exact right fields for software requirements. But the biggest difference, in my opinion, is how easily exportable it is in Formwork. And that's kind of like what we're actually talking about today. after talking for 5 minutes about irrelevant stuff. Which is exporting these things. Like if you would create these sort of like tickets in Jira, it would probably work, but then exporting this would be this huge mess, right? Because then you're kind of like thinking like, okay, would this like create a huge Word file? How would the formatting look? You can't really customize it. Will auditors accept it? And you have this gigantic mess. And in GitHub and GitLab, it's kind of even worse because you don't even have an export there for example, for issues or so. Or if you like create it as markdown files in a repository, you have to like custom write your export, which is always a huge mess. So how is this different in Formwork? In Formwork, you just like navigate to audit export, and the really cool feature, which is the new feature now, is it automatically generates the more or less exact same things as if you had filled out our templates. And I think this is really, really cool. So based on what you entered in the software requirements, which we saw earlier, it automatically generates spreadsheets for you, which kind of like look as if you like old school filled out these templates. And they're like in the XLSX format. So this is kind of like the Excel format, which can also be read by Google Sheets and everything. So let's have a look how this looks like. Let's download the software requirements spec, which again is relevant for this example. And oh my God, I have to like shrink this window. All right, and you see it's like, well, it's a very unspectacular spreadsheet. You see like the software requirement ID is like the first column, and then it like just pretty much enters all the data which we entered into the form fields earlier. But now the interesting thing is, right, you also have all the relations here. So it also like it lists all the relations, for example, the related stakeholder requirement IDs. It lists all like the software test IDs. It even like orders them. So always like one comes before two, obviously, failure modes, and so on and so on. So this is really cool because it automatically generates this for you, so you don't have to maintain the spreadsheet. Instead, it just always, anytime you change something in Formwork, it also changes it in the exported spreadsheet. So this is really cool. And of course, you can also generate the traceability matrix from this. Where is it? It's actually here. So if you didn't know what the traceability matrix was, now you will know in like 3 seconds. I'm sure you're pretty excited about this. All right, so you can actually see this sheet has like a ginormous count of tabs. And for now, let's look at the software requirements. So for example, you see here, it actually describes it. Software requirements, how they trace to stakeholder requirements. Then you have like software requirements in the columns here in the first column, and stakeholder requirements here actually on this other axis. And then like anytime a specific software requirement here implements a stakeholder requirement, there's like an X. So software requirement 5 implements stakeholder requirement 1, and so on. So, and you have this like huge matrix kind of thing. And of course, creating these manually is like a gigantic mess. And I've actually seen companies create this manually, which is pretty insane. And you get this for really everything, like software test to software requirements, failure mode, software requirements. So really like there's everything auto-generated for you, and it's automatically updating anytime you change something in Formwork. Great, all right, and that's all there is. And I think this is actually like really exciting because it's like a further step towards automatically generating technical documentation and like kind of like making this job less cumbersome. And instead of like creating spreadsheets manually, it's actually about, well, using software, which is actually kind of nice to use, and just generating the right files out of that and handing those into your auditors. So I think that's really, really cool. And that being said, the spreadsheets are kind of like optimized for auditor like compatibility because they're like super similar to our templates, and they contain the exact right like names and columns as those which we usually see in technical documentation files. Great. All right. I hope you're just excited as I am about this. Feel free to try it out. If you go to our website and look at Formwork, you can sign up for the free version. You can also get like a trial of the pro version, which contains this feature. So great. Then let me know how you like it, and see you somewhere soon using Formwork.